Welcome everyone to Module 4 of Expansion Training. So up until now, you have been learning new practices and new embodiment tools that you can incorporate into a daily routine. And by a daily routine, I suggest that you try just 1, 2, or 3 small practices, micro practices that you might alternate every day or every couple of days, or maybe 2 or 3 times a week, just so that you can try a few different kinds and see how that feels in your nervous system. And just maintain the ones you resonate with. And then after a little while, perhaps a week or 2, swap it out for another one, so that you get to try a few different practices and you get to experiment with which feels right in which kind of circumstance that you find yourself in. What feels good when you just wake up? What helps you when you need to regulate and catch yourself before you become reactive? What helps you feel more like who you really are and how you want to feel? So what also helps you feel more connected? So all of those things are the different invitations that some of those practices have for you. So I really invite you to just try a few different things, experiment and explore. Don't get rigid in a daily practice. It doesn't have to look the same. You can always change it up. It's not like you would be going to a gym and working the same sets of muscles in more or less the same way. You can actually try different things, because the nervous system is all about what delights, inspires, excites your curiosity and your playfulness. So that's really the invitation of these practices, is how you can move into something where you feel more playful, more connected, more curious. So let's just begin. I've got some slides today for you for this module. So let me start sharing my slide. I'll start sharing my slide and we can get going. Just bear with me. There we go. All right. So today, the module for today is energy clearing and sacred boundaries. And we're actually up to module 4. In this session, we're going to continue our exploration of holding the container that we began in the second module by looking at boundaries and energetic clearing and cleansing. So we're going to be moving from holding and containing, which is what you learned in module 2. And we're going to expand that concept into holding, containing, and boundarying. It's a bit of a mouthful. So what is a boundary? A boundary is something that sets a limit or demarcates a line that should not be crossed. Most people who experienced childhood trauma assume the purpose of a boundary is protection, mostly to protect themselves. Might be in contact, any of you might be in contact with the feeling of needing to make a boundary when you become angry, or the sign that you become angry that you need to make a boundary. Victims of narcissistic abuse and toxic family dynamics are usually surprised to hear and learn that boundaries are intended to create opportunities for more connection. Of course, making a boundary to keep someone away is completely reasonable, but it's not a relational boundary. It's not intended to maintain or grow a relationship. And that's what we're talking about here when we're working with our clients and supporting our clients to make boundaries with others and the people in their lives. So another way of understanding boundary making is that the primary purpose of setting a boundary is to create enough safety so that psychological intimacy is possible. A good boundary, a healthy boundary, establishes rules and sets limits to create more safety for all parties, so that more intimacy and connection between people is possible. In helping relationships, boundaries guard the relationship between helper and client, respecting the rights and responsibilities of both and the differentiation between them. However, setting out to control and limit a client under the guise of maintaining boundaries runs the risk of being coercive. And I will speak a little bit more about that as we continue the presentation. So there are 5 boundary types. The physical boundaries prevent unwanted physical contact. They provide clarity in roles and safety for both helper and client. They minimize intrusion and abuse. Emotional boundaries prevent intrusion by the other person or prevent intrusion by the other person or prevent them from becoming overly intimate when it is not wanted. They contain emotions that could leak out in harmful ways. Relational boundaries, that's our third one, provides a space to be with another. They maintain the client-helper relationship as a professional rather than a personal one and minimize the confusion of dual relationships. Moral boundaries are concerned with moral values, standards, and beliefs. Legal boundaries relate to the law and protect against official complaints and malpractice liability. So I wanted to think about boundaries as a sacred tool that we use in connection and relationship, and particularly in relationship with our clients. Boundaries in psychotherapy are designed to contain mutual, emergent, emotional, relational processes and offer a structure for a professional and therapeutic relationship. Ideally, boundaries provide reliability and predictability for the client, so they're able to freely and safely process without being confused by what is acceptable in the clinical relationship. Have you ever been there where you haven't really been sure what is acceptable in the relationship you have with your clinician? Clients feel like that all the time. I remember my first therapist, and it was a male therapist who identified as gay. And in the first session I had with him, he told me that he hadn't always been gay and that he had actually dated women before identifying as gay. And that was a boundary crossing. I actually discovered, not only just like conceptually that that's a boundary crossing, but I discovered for quite some time after, I wasn't sure how I should interact with him, because all of a sudden he changed the dynamic from a female client seeing a gay male therapist, of where there was no risk of sexual boundaries being crossed. For me, there was no risk. And then all of a sudden there was a risk. All of a sudden I did not know how I was expected to be in the relationship and whether something might happen in the relationship that was going to be sexual or in some way. I suddenly had to feel more alert in the relationship, and I never broached it with him, but I was very aware of it from the beginning, that I felt violated, and not in a way that I felt abused, but my process felt violated. And so we need to be really aware of the consequences of what we disclose to our clients. And even what might seem like a trivial boundary, we need to be aware that in crossing it may have implications and repercussions for our clients. So boundaries also acknowledge there is a power imbalance that is unavoidably part of the professional helping relationships, and they set limits for the helper's expression of power. And we might say, even in that example that I just gave, that clinician had more power, and so therefore the confusion that ensued was because he had inappropriately used his own power in the relationship. We weren't on an equal footing where we were both talking about our sexual orientation. or even past relationships. I wasn't going to him for relationship counseling, so it wasn't even part of our conversation. It wasn't even part of my process at all. I did not need to know what his sexual orientation is and was. And I've been asked what my sexual orientation is by clients as well. And I've always maintained, whilst I don't see that as a private thing, I see that as irrelevant to the therapeutic process. And in fact, them knowing it might create a relevancy that is unhelpful. So that I've always drawn that line and saying, you know, I don't have an issue with, you know, telling people what my sexuality is, but I don't see it relevant here. And I actually think it could get in the way of what work you're doing here. So I declined to answer. As part of identifying and getting in touch with our boundaries and our sacred boundaries, we get in touch with our container. We're more aware of our body. And the idea is that to expand our container, we're going to touch our boundaries. So part of the boundary making process is actually expanding your container. Exactly how and when to engage the processes of holding, containing, and boundarying is one of the key ethical and clinical judgments a professional helper needs to make. Sometimes the decision involves putting in a new boundary or pushing at boundaries. Even in a clinical context, those behaviors may be very relevant. At all times, however, boundary making needs to be shaped in a two-person relational context. It needs to be relevant to what is happening and emerging in the field, in the two-person field at the time in this dynamic context. It's not about rigid adherence to rules that creates an effective boundary. It's the mutual, emergent, flexible and attuned properties of boundaries and the process of boundary making that engenders trust, respect and care and the desire to maintain agreed boundaries. It's actually more common than you probably think that helpers panic when their boundaries have been breached, often unwittingly by a client. That's why it's essential for helping professionals to learn to manage their own activation and fight-flight response so they don't engage in fear-based reflexive defenses when there is no genuine threat to their safety or survival. We're actually going to talk a little bit about that in the group, and I think you've already been prompted to answer a question along those lines. And there's another prompt in the workbook on this topic. So I really want you to give some thought about this particular topic. But we're going to move on to energy clearing for the time being. So what I want to say about this module is that you might be introduced to some things you know a lot about already. Okay, you may actually have come across these concepts and are really familiar with them. What I want to try and do is just introduce some new ways of contextualizing energy clearing and making boundaries in the clinical relationship. So I'm not expecting to tell you anything surprisingly new, but I would like to help you see and understand something like energy clearing and boundary making in a slightly different way. And the first part of boundary making and energy clearing I want to talk about is from this shamanic perspective. So in the shamanic world, we have lower realm and middle realm and upper world spirits. So it's not a hierarchy. There's nothing inherently lower consciousness or lower frequency about the lower realm spirits. when shamans journey to the lower realms, they do the same as if they were to journey to the middle and upper realms, where they're seeking a helping spirit. So in all realms, there are spirits that can help them with the task that they have at hand. However, I have found that certain tools and substances are more helpful than others for different things. And this is my own personal observation for my own personal use. So I'm going to invite you to explore what it is for you, because it may be different. But just by giving you this example and introducing to this way of thinking about energy clearing, you might start to discover something new, perhaps. What I also want to talk about and make sure that you understand is about cultural appropriation, which we'll discuss more in the next module, and also sustainability of materials. So white sage, for instance, I grow my own white sage because it is one of the many substances for clearing that is somewhat endangered. All right, and there are others that are even more so on this list. Palo Santo, for example. So if you can't grow your own or obtain your own from your cupboard or from a recycled thing, then maybe think about, using something else. So I definitely use white sage when it comes to working and clearing lower realm entities and energies. I find it works really great for space clearing and for any of those kind of entities that may be hanging around in spaces, not necessarily attached to anyone. And it's just that kind of like general clearing up that needs to happen energetically, just like putting out the garbage or something like that, or washing the dishes. That sort of level of clearing works extremely well with sage. I would also like to say that in the Native American tradition, when you use sage, the Native Americans Indians refer to it as smudging. However, in the Celtic traditions, for example, it is referred to as smoking. Now, it's not just a word that can be substituted, in that smoking ceremonies are not the same as smudging ceremonies. There's actually a very different practice. It's used quite differently in Celtic shamanism than in Native American shamanism, but it's just to understand that also not only is it used differently, there is a different word for it. So to be respectful and aware of what is culturally sensitive, I suggest that you adopt the word smoking, particularly if you're from a Celtic background or from another background. Of course, if you're from a Native American Indian background, then by all means, and you feel like that is part of your culture, then by all means, you have that cultural right to use the word smudging. So let's move on to what I find to be useful in the middle and upper worlds. And that's frankincense. I find that the most useful. You can get that in the form of resin, incense, powder, or essential oil. I mostly use resin or powder, incense more casually, I would say. So I might use frankincense incense almost like a space clearing for lower realm spirits. Or a space clearing for the middle and upper world spirits. I'll often kind of layer it. So I might start with sage if it feels right, and only if it feels right. Otherwise, I might go straight to frankincense. But I definitely prefer resin or powder on a charcoal disc. I think it's certainly more potent. And I have plenty of it and have had it for a very long time. So there are some issues with sustainability, particularly with the process of extracting it for essential oils. So do look into the appropriate sustainable practices for frankincense before you run out and get some. For personal clearing, I most like Palo Santo. I find it has a really different effect on my energy field. So it just seems to lighten it very quickly, and I really notice the difference with compared to any of the others. There's a big change when I use Palo Santo, and I have both the wood and the essential oil. I use the essential oil more as an for anointing because it's concentrated and more difficult to extract, you know, that there's more involved in the processing of it. So I would use it on the soles of my feet or on my inner wrists, or sometimes, you know, at this point here on my head. But otherwise I'll burn Palo Santo. And most of you who, if you've had experience with Palo Santo, would know that it doesn't stay alight for very long. One of the best ways of burning, and then, you know, because you will have to continually reburn, is to have a candle by the way, so you have a constant flame, and then you can each time it goes out, you can put it back into the flame. But the idea of Palo Santo is that it doesn't burn for a long time, but it does leave this beautiful trail of smoke behind. So, you know, bearing in mind that all of these items, all of these products have sustainability risks, it's really useful to keep in mind that you can use things that don't involve environmental issues with sustainability. You can use a singing bowl. So I have a very large Tibetan brass singing bowl that I like to use. And you can actually just use your hands. So I've been observing Tibetan Buddhist monks in when they're debating their dogma and their discourse and their literature. And they have this kind of really interesting chopping, clapping process that I'm not going to teach you theirs because that's their process. But when I watched them do it, it inspired me to create my own chopping, clapping process. I really feel like it's based on some of the Tibetan Buddhist things that I've seen, but also on even the New Age thing from, you know, angelic cord cutting, and also just that the ritual of creating sound to clear space that comes from all shamanic traditions. So that's why I created this particular practice, and I'm going to invite you to do this with me. Okay, so all you need is a pair of hands, preferably your own. So all you're going to do is you're going to go chop, 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 clap, 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 flick, flick, flick. Okay, chop, 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 flick, flick, flick. All right. Now, one of the things I really like to do is a big flick. So I'm just going to wheel my chair back a little bit and show you a bigger flick. That would look like chop, 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 flick, flick, flick. Okay, so you can do that flicking. Now, some people just like the flicking. Some people find just flicking really helpful. I don't find that as helpful. I think, if anything, the clapping is the most helpful part of it for me. I find sound really just changes the energy in the environment really quickly. So, but you do what feels right for you. Definitely the flicking is really helpful. I know that when I recently visited Bellingen, and I was in a situation where I was taking on a lot of energetic and clearing for some people. And when I left that place, I needed to go and do a little bit of clearing. And I went to a local public bathroom block, and they had the most freshest, purest water in the taps there. It must have come straight from the hills. And the minute I put my hands under that tap, I could just feel it all just go away. It was so powerful. And I certainly don't get that kind of experience from tap water. So you can run your hands under a tap, but be mindful of the source of the water, because I think there's definitely a difference between tap water and pure spring water when it comes to clearing energies. And the reason we're talking about this is not for any kind of paranoia or worry. This is just things that you might do between client sessions. So it's extremely fast and quick and effective to do that chop, 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 clap, 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 flick, flick, flick process between clients to just move the energy out of your field. And certainly in that case, I would do some extra brushing in my field. And I'll probably do some extra clapping. So this is what this is for. It's to invite you to thinking about how you could clear your field or clear a client's field or prepare yourself between sessions or for sessions. And it has a shamanic flavor to it, which is what this course is about. But I'm not teaching you how to journey as a shaman, but I am reminding you that even in other traditions like Siberian shamanism, which is what I relate to, as well as Celtic shamanism, there are traditions that are the same and different to what you may already know in the Native American tradition. So there's a few things that we can do that I'd like to draw your attention to over the course of the week for your homework and for your home play. Firstly, I want to direct your attention to pages 19 to 21 in the workbook. Those pages are all about the boundaries and what I've just covered here in the module. So if you want to go back and read along or refer back to anything and it's not on the slides, you may find it in the workbook, and you may wish to look at the workbook as well as paying attention to the slides. So go to 19 to 21 to do that. Now, on page 22, there are some reflection questions on boundaries. So those are questions that I would very much like to invite you to answer and post in the Facebook group so that you can have a think about it and other people can think about it. And it certainly is one of the questions on if you've ever been experienced a boundary breach, a client breaching your boundaries, and how did you respond to that? And so let's get a little bit honest. If you can think of a situation where it did, feel like it felt a bit like survival. It felt like you needed to defend and protect yourself and protect your boundaries when it came to your client. Now, if you go to page 23, this is the wrap up of the season of autumn or fall, because this is the last module in the first season that we cover in expansion training, which is autumn or fall. Okay, so these strategies are for harmonizing your energy with autumn. So that's what we're completing now. And you'll find strategies like decluttering, self-inquiry, journal, reflecting and releasing, breathing, and finishing unfinished business. And I really invite you to look at what you can complete in the first 4 modules of expansion training course now, so that you're ready to move into winter with these things completed. Now, if you continue on to page 27 and 28, you'll see there's an intention setting exercise there. Now, we're going to do that together in our next live call. However, if you're the kind of person that likes to read ahead or likes to make notes or likes to even do the exercise a couple of times, or just wants more time to do an exercise, because we'll be doing it live together, and so there'll be a limited time, then go ahead and do that exercise or make notes for that exercise or read that exercise or whatever you would like to do. You don't have to wait, and you may wish to do it more than once. So please feel free, but knowing that the intention is for us to do the intention setting exercise together when we meet before we move across into winter and the next module, which is pretty exciting because it's all about shamanic processes in the next module. So we've had a little introduction to them today, but there'll certainly be more in the next module. The other thing that we'll be doing together live is we'll be doing a boundary exercise. And so I would like to ask you to bring along a ball of yarn or wool or twine. Kitchen twine is fine. And if you don't have any of those, although I expect you've got a week to find them and I expect you probably will, but if you don't, you can use a very long electrical extension lead. And I have used that with my clients at times. They have found, especially I'm thinking my male clients really liked the long extension lead. And I've had a couple who have taken that practice up at home. So you can certainly bring one along and try it out if you'd like the feel of exploring with a long electrical extension lead, or bring a ball of twine or wool. We're going to be exploring our boundaries at an embodied physical level. So you'll need something like this to support you to have that exploration. So that is really all we need to do for module 4. I hope you've enjoyed this module and that you've got a lot out of it. Please review it if you need to, and think about the home play exercises. And I'll see you all the following week. Thank you. Bye.